Hello, I've just read chapter 7 of Coruscant Nights Shadows. I really needed to split these chapters up into more separate chapters like they were doing last book. Um, um, this could have just been 3 separate chapters. It did not need to be one long chapter. Um, because the 3 different plot lines that go on don't have any connection to each other aside from the third one, and even then that could have just been on its own. Anyway, um, I was going to read this chapter yesterday, but I was just so worn out after the length of chapter 6 that I just knew I wouldn't be able to read it yesterday. I just didn't have the energy left. Because as much as I love reading, it is exhausting, especially when there's a long chapter. Um, or at least long by my standards. And this was a long chapter. Chapter 6 was a long chapter, and this was another long chapter, so there's definitely no way I would have been able to finish this chapter yesterday if I did read it. Because it starts on page 61, ends on page 82. That's about, 21 pages, and yeah, I just get worn out on chapters that length. Anyway, um, basically, Jax is started using the Force to to heat the air molecules surrounding him to stop the pheromones of Deja from affecting him. And he sees Deja get a bit uncomfortable, realizing that it's not really working. But he also doesn't really blame Radiator. You know when he goes on, Radiator's doing this. Anyway, um, um, Jax can't really blame Deja, whatever it is, for using the pheromones just to secure their deal, even though he'd already said he'd help them. She wants to get off well with her boyfriend, and it is confirmed that they are together. And you know, she just wants to secure it, and you can't blame her for that. And then starts saying that they've got to get the preparations done, and he orders Rahinian. I'm just gonna put it up. Well, Hinyon, you know who to contact at the port, stop the process, so I5 and I go with Deja to talk with her Kamasi friends, Laranth, you and Den, and you pause this for a moment, and then Den comes back, and says that he just needs some air, and Jax can sense that he is not very content with his situation, but he figures that Den, he's quite the loud one when it comes to his opinions, he'll tell what's wrong sooner or later. And he just says that Laranth and Den know what to do. And then I5 and Jax go with Deja to a skimmer, which is described as being very retro and very fitting for Deja. And they make their way kind of up to level 75, I believe it was. And they go into a Resiplex, which I assume is just a complex, but Resi. And they make their way over to and we're told that she that and Deidre tries to contact Vess, but to no avail. And Jack says that you don't seem worried that you can't contact Vess, and Deidre says that it's not uncommon for Vess to not contact her. It's not uncommon for Vess to not just contact her, and he just stays quiet. It's usually when he's in a place, usually when he's in a hard time, he usually focuses obsessively on his work, and usually his best art comes out from it. And they make their way over to the Resi Cube. Deidre opens the door, and there's some Vess dead in blood that splatters all over the white apartment. Now, Resi Cube, but it's an apartment. That's going to be very messy to clean up. um, then it's not really clarified. I think it is made. somewhat, it's not really clarified whether they called the police or not. I assume they were already there. Um, the Prefect Polhouse, a high-ranking police officer, is investigating the scene, and he asks, and once he sees Dee just sitting in a hover chair with a shoulder drape, with not a shoulder draped over a carpet, with a blanket draped over her shoulders, and House asks, have they touched anything aside from the door panel, and Drax says no, and House asks, answering for all of them, by the way, Drax. And then House asks if Deidre had touched Vess because she was his partner, and he says surely you must have wanted to check if he was alive. And Jax feels a bit irritated because it's what part of no don't you understand? But of course, acting like that's not going to help them in this situation. It'll only hinder them. And again, Jack Sansa's saying that, well, we didn't really need to check. It's so obvious that he's dead. And I I5 goes into this really long explanation about how Vess is most definitely dead, surrounding all how much blood he's lost, etc. um, and House asks, did you program I5 this way? Of course, he doesn't say I5, he doesn't know it's called that, but he says, did you program this droid this way? And Drax says, no, it came that way. And Al says that, well, maybe you should get a politeness, maybe you should get some politeness stuff, a politeness module or whatever it was, putting in, because not all officers are as easy going as him. And then House starts asking some more questions. Um, and he asks Deja that if he's got this right, and he says that, so you were worried about your safety, and so you went to Jax, or as he refers to Jax, this guy, which, for safety, and Jax takes that this guy to be as this amateur, which he of course doesn't take lightly. He doesn't take it very lightly, but he counts to 10 in both his own minds and in a basic and Ugnaught. And there's also another thing brought up earlier about the constant chattering of other species, and how Jax finds it hard enough to think, let alone know what tongue he's thinking in, which I found quite funny. Anyway, House turns to Jax and asks if it's his routine for if he does this routinely, um, if he routinely provides this security service, and Jax says, that's right, I'm licensed to do so. It's a new classification, confidential, fact finder, non-profit. Um, and House says that, so according to the DocBot, Vess has been dead for about 2 hours and 15 minutes, give and take, and you'll need statements from all of them about where they were. Um, and then House asks Deja about if he was worried about Vess, get it about her and Vess's safety, why didn't she contact the proper authorities? And he just says, well, they suspected that maybe because they suspected that the attack on Kamas was done by the authorities, so they couldn't trust them. Um, and House says that everyone's heard of it, but he says it was a military tactic, it was a military action, nothing to do with the police. And he says that an Imperial sector police are not political. And then Deidre gets a bit angry and goes, really? Their words emerged steeped in bitterness. Somebody should tell that to the Viserion students at Imperial City University. The prefect the prefect has had the good grace to look embarrassed. That incident was an aberration. As within any large organisation, there are unfortunately rogue elements. A centurion in charge of the unit in question was arrested and is awaiting trial. I'm sure that makes the parents of the dead students feel much better. And then House says that an officer will take their statements and fit them with a locator ring, or I5 fit them with a locator plug. That'll be, and then the police rolls up and asks and requests the three of them to come this way. And Jack thinks that this isn't a very ideal situation. Because now they could be possible suspects. He also doesn't really like the idea, because the idea of, the police, or as it says, the calls, looking into them, because especially if they get questioned or use a what was it? It was a truth scan. Then it could bring to light some embarrassing things and some illegal things that of course they've had to do for Whiplash to help people. And of course, really, they need to either find the killer, and so the plan is to find the killer, so the police can quickly move on to the next crime, and they don't have to worry to, and they don't have to pay much attention to everyone here. And we're told that even though a Jedi Master can resist the truth scan in his sleep, Jax is not at that level, and it could risk him losing some memories, or well, damaging his memory. And again, he thinks that they gotta find who killed Vespilette, so the police don't investigate too far, and then they can otherwise they will have them on their backs until doomsday, as it says. And then we cut over to Aura Singh, who seems like she's passed her trials, and she's taken into the governmental lane in a sky limo, and we're told a bit about her past again, about how her mother, I'm not going to try and pronounce her name, about how one of her earliest memories was with her mother, before she could even walk, and her mother was carrying her in her arms, and she felt this was the closest thing she ever gotten to feeling happiness. And that was very quickly stopped by her mother, who was a spice addict. And she dropped Ora onto the floor, and she went to meet her dealer. And it was only until basically the next day that her mind had cleared enough to realise that she had found that she forgot her baby, and so she got her again. But Ora Singh had thinks about how she has inadvertently teach Ora the fundamentals of survival. Trust no one, only trust yourself for survival. Anyway, she's then taken down below to Coruscant, and she then comes out of the limo out in confusion because she thinks she was going to go to one of the government buildings, not down in the lower levels. And the sky limo leaves, and then she hears, and then she realises everything is not completely silent, and she turns in one swift move and ignites her red lightsaber. And then Vader appears, and he takes her lightsaber and turns off the blade, and she takes out some of her knives, prepared to fight if she has to. And Vader then overloads the lightsaber. It gets brighter and brighter until the only thing Aura can see is Vader. She can't even see her surroundings. the hum of the lightsaber just increased, it basically increased, gets louder and louder, and also a still increasing in pitch. And the lightsaber crystal gets completely overloaded. The crystal's completely overloaded, and Vader then drops the hilt, the completely useless hilt now, and he warns Ora that if she draws the weapon on him again, even reflexively, then it will send her back to a prison camp. On a prison barge off-world, and he says, "Now, do I make myself clear?" And he says that, as he said on Uva before, he has a job for her. And Aura Singh says that she's listening. And then we pick back up with Den and Laranth, and we're given a description of their scenery. And this is what I've been waiting for. This is what I've been waiting for. Two things I've been waiting for, actually. First off is the mention of the Inquisitorius. That's actually the main reason I've been reading Coruscant Nights, because of the Inquisitors. And also, another reason I started reading Coruscant Nights now was because I was being tempted to read Thursday Murder Club. Because I've seen the movie, it was a very good movie. And I'm interested in reading the original books, but I wanted to get Coruscant Nights out of the way first. So hopefully I can do that. Anyway, Dan is, of course, struggling to keep up with Laranth because he's only got short legs. And we're told the Inquisitorius is brought up, and we're given a hint of Laranth's past, which is what I've been waiting for. And we're told that Mel then says, "I've got to tell you, this whole fatal femme thing is getting old. You know you're hard, I know you're hard. Anyone around you for more than 5 minutes who doesn't know that you're hard isn't operating on the same sensory framework. So, as a personal favour, why don't you lighten up?" And Laranth pulled it sharply and looked down at him. "What makes you think I have a choice?" We're told that Den doesn't really know a whole lot about Laranth, and really none of us do. He knows more about her background as a Grey Paladin than he knows about Laranth herself. And we're told that he does know that she had met Jax in Flame Knight, which we're then told what Flame Knight was. And it was a operation designed to rid the Empire of Force sensitives. And it was a nocturnal massacre, and also to draw any remaining Jedi out of hiding. We're told it had been one of the first actions undertaken by the Inquisitorius. And just skimming through what it says here. And we're told, and it says, by the standards of that formidable and menacing body, the operation had been a great success, winning high praise from the Emperor himself. And we're told that by combining forces, Jax and Laranth had only barely managed to escape the ambush. And we're told that Laranth hasn't emerged unscathed, because of course she lost a little bit of a leku, about a decimeter, 10 centimeters, and she also has a scar on her cheek. And we're told that it didn't really matter who Laranth Tarek had been before Flame Knight, but because Laranth definitely had been thoroughly purged by Flame Knight, and it says Inquisitors, those truth officers steeped in the dark side, still prowls multifarious sectors of Imperial Center, albeit in fewer numbers. The majority of them have been dispatched to the Outer Rim territories and similar galactic black planets to sniff out illegal force activity. But the ones who remained were still to be feared. Den had heard that some were capable of isolating a lone force-sensitive, nascent or otherwise, out of a population of millions. The chances of discovery were still astronomically slim. Nevertheless, the citizens sweated every time Jax or Laranth made use of the force. It's said that Laranth was never deliberately unkind to Den, but he still feels some uneasiness when she has to deal with her, and just because of how glum and gloomy and dark she is, and he says not once could he remember seeing her smile, and he thinks that it's probably a good thing, otherwise the scar tissue would split wide open. Um, and it says that, well, in any event, now's not the time to wonder about that Tarak's past. And we say it told Drax had given them an assignment, which is to check the availability of possible UML routes and determine the quickest and safest way to get the Kamasi and his girlfriend off-world. For unavoidable security reasons, this had to be done in person and not via electronic means of communication that could be intercepted or traced. And we're told that there are various Whiplash members there, but they don't really know which. They don't really know that each other are there. It's all on a need-to-know basis. And then asks who they're going to be dealing with, and Lemon says it's a Cathonian or something like that. And then says, "Oh, not that, not that," because that gives him the creeps. And Lemon says, I sympathise, but that's who we're seeing. Come on, let's get it over with. She increased her pace, striding swiftly down the litter-strewn street that was becoming more crowded as the day progressed. Then ground again and hurried after. I don't suppose it would do any good to say that I've got a bad feeling about this. Consider it indigestion, she replied curtly, and deal with it. Um, First off, I want to talk about Laranth, because this is the thing I've been waiting for. Learning a bit more about Laranth. It definitely seems like now the reason why we haven't really known a lot about her is because we're not meant to know a lot about her at this point. And I think that's fair. I think it was just in the first book, especially with Jax, where we were supposed to know a lot about. We were supposed to learn quite a bit about him initially, and you just didn't get to that. I think Laranth, especially compared to other characters, felt very underdeveloped. And I like that there's a lot of implication as to what might have happened here. There's a lot of implication that she might have been a little bit more, um, a bit less cautious, more easygoing, more, um, just, and now, she's not as tough, and now she is keeping everything up on guard. She's basically the opposite of who she used to be, I think, based on what we've been told. And just because of late night. And I do know the Inquisitors are in the next book and the book following. I know they're in Coruscant Nights 3 and The Last Jedi. There's Probus, Tesla, Yomal Chael, Masira, Renifer Ren, and the Philly Master of Probus Tesla that I don't remember the name of. I think Coruscant Nights will feel like a 3, will feel like a conclusion, because The Last Jedi is just a spiritual successor. But I'm curious to see whether Uralche or Masira or Probus Tesla, because they're the only Inquisitors in the next book, will somehow tie back, or maybe all three of them will somehow tie back to Laranth. I think we'll probably get some revelation that they are the Inquisitors, or one of them's the Inquisitors that was hunting down Jackson Laranth, one of them that ambushed them. I have a feeling they have some relation to Laranth in some way. So, yeah. And, Laranth, we kind of get a bit more of her personality in this chapter, how very dismissive she is of her past, how she doesn't really like that about talking about her past, and also just how, is stoic the word? Not really. But, very passive aggressive. She doesn't try to be mean, but she can come across as rather rude. And I think again, that kind of partly comes from her past, um, Flame Knight, and just the way she just dismisses and ends feelings. Yeah. Uh, Our singing is quite interesting. Again, I've said before in I think it was the last video, with the reviews. I think that one involved the first our sing chapter. That I was quite intrigued by her character, and she has a very interesting personality. And this chapter does quite a bit more to kind of go through and develop her personality and show us a little bit more, her personality in other situations. How she's still very similar in other situations, but it was very nice to kind of get a little bit more perspective on her character, I think. And yeah, she's an interesting character. She's an interesting character. Um, then there's of course the first bit of the chapter, which honestly that could have just been a chapter. Honestly, the three segments of this chapter could have just been standalone chapters. They did not need to be together. One of my biggest compliments of the previous book was the chapter length. And one of my biggest criticisms of this book so far is the chapter lengths. Because sometimes, for the most part in the book, up until about chapter 6, they were really good. The chapter lengths were really good in this book up until chapter 6. If this book had more chapters, it would have been perfect. If it, and I'm not saying to write more, I'm just saying to split up, chapter 6, I brought up in the previous review, that could have been split into 2, 3, 4 different chapters. This chapter could have been split into 2, 3 chapters. You do need to put them to, you do need to have all of the, you do need to have them be one overarching chapter, especially when they don't really have much connection to each other. So, yeah. Uh, it definitely is a very sticky situation Drax is in now, you know, um, because I assume the locator ring means, the Imperial Sector Police are going to know where they are. So that's definitely a very tricky situation they're in. And I assume this might be where the private investigator thing might come in, because that's one of the biggest things I've been complaining about. Is for some reason that's one of the most one of my nitpicks, not biggest things I've been complaining about. One of my nitpicks that it says Jax is a private investigator, and he's never been a private investigator in these books yet. And even if he does investigate this, it's not because he's technically not being a private investigator, because he's not really a PI. He's just doing this on his own accord. So it is, um, but yeah. And also you can understand why. Also, Deidre's aggressiveness to House. A horse, maybe it be? There's no way that you can't make it sound like another word. I'm going to call him House. Um, how she started talking about the Imperial Center Academy and the casualties there. You understand, again, you understand her frustration. And you understand why she can't trust any of the actual authorities, etc. Again with Jax, you see how you again just something that we can't be that's kind of that we saw in the last book, and it's come up again here. He does not like being put down by others. He does not like being put down by others, and the way it's made very clear that he does not like it when House basically in Jax's mind called him an amateur, and he has to do counter 10 twice, once in basic, which is just English or whatever your native language is, and next in Ugnaught. So yeah, um, there were some funny moments in this book, in this chapter. But again, it just was a bit too long for my liking. I started reading it at about 11 a.m. It's now 2 p.m. I started this, review 30 minutes ago, but would have been almost 2 p.m. anyway. It's 14 minutes, it's 2 p.m. 18 minutes. But yeah. Anything else? There were also a couple of things that were brought up in this chapter, like how Jax, after the almost, as it says, the almost disastrous episode with Prince Sheezel, he's researched all sentient species that could produce pheromones that could influence others. And that's kind of why he why he was stopping the pheromones from Deidre from working. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say on this chapter. So yeah, I'll end it here. And also don't know if I'll read more chapters today because again this was a long chapter. It was a long chapter. 20 pages. 14's usually my limit. Even 14 is stretching it. So yeah, anyway. I keep thinking about in Luke Skywalker Shadows of the Beans, or how there was that one chapter that went on for 50 pages, and I don't know how I was able to manage reading through that, but I somehow did. I think that took me all night to read through actually. So yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching and goodbye. Hello everyone. I've just read chapter 8 of Coruscant Nights, Geo Shadows. I said I wasn't sure if I'd read another chapter today. I have, and I think maybe I shouldn't have. I really don't think I shouldn't have, but I thought, it's only 10 pages, so I'll read it. So I've read 30 pages today. So the start of the chapter, you're basically getting an explanation as to what a Cephalon is, or whatever it was called last chapter, and in this chapter, which is basically just a being who was multiple consciousnesses and controlling different parts of the body that are all separate from each other, etc. Which kind of explains why Dane gets a bit weirded out by it and also didn't quite know what pronouns to use. We were also told about how they perceive time and space differently. To them, they perceive time the way we perceive space, and they perceive space the way we perceive time. And it's I5 tried to explain it to Dender and you couldn't episodes around it in the past. We tried to explain it and then couldn't episodes around it. And then we got over to Hannum Tycohinian, and we're basically given a quick reminder as to, what's going on. He has to find lightsaber components, and he also has to find, we're also given a quick reminder of his history, and we're told about about his fascination with the Force, and how he's arranged to have his midichlorians checked, and the results have come in, and he's only at a measly 2,000 per cell. He's not strong enough to touch the Force, and he's disappointed, but he thinks it's probably about time now to end his research and fascination with the Force, and so he's about to continue, and then he sees a tab. And then he sees a tab in the thing he's looking at. So he opens it up, and it's a report, and the chapter incorrectly says it's 20 years ago from the waning years of the Clone Wars, which was only a year ago, etc. Only a couple months back to a year. So that got it completely wrong, but he was able to look into it, and it was basically a report from Barry Sophie about a plant back on Drongar that was able to increase someone's force potency, and of course Rahinian being extremely fascinated with the Force and extremely fascinated in getting his own Force connection. This of course intrigues him, and he thinks that he'll have to be very careful about how he goes about acquiring this plant and this forgotten piece of information. And he thinks that anyone who's put him in this miserable station will have ample reason to regret it. And he's very much, he's very much dead set on getting this plant and having its effects. And that's where we end the chapter. Honestly, there's not a whole lot to talk about, but I've got a record a review. I'm personally, even I can't wrap my head around Cephalon. Um, and especially it's even funnier considering I5 says it's simple, really. Um, I understand the concept, but I can't wrap my head around the experience of it. And I think that's the thing, it's you understand the concept, but you can't wrap your head around the actual experience of it, so yeah. Mahinian, I like that we're getting another chapter focusing on Mahinian. I think it's just a bit of a shame that most of the chapter is just being that half of the chapter to most of it with Mahinian is pretty much just focused on catching us up on his history. Um, so yeah, because he really hasn't had a whole lot to do in this book. He was by far probably the best written character in the last book. He really hasn't had a lot to do in this book. He's really just kind of just been there. So, yeah. Um, it's going to be interesting to see, where that forced connection thing goes to. I think even Mahinian has the common sense to know not to face Vader, So, um, I don't really have anything else to say on this chapter. There's not a whole lot to talk about. It's a 10-page chapter, but there's really not a lot to talk about. Aside from it had a mistake in there. There was something in last chapter I was meant to talk about, but I forgot. Oh yeah, I remember now. In my chapter 6 review, I had said that I was getting annoyed at the amount of complex terms that were being used, for terms I was unfamiliar with. Now use, and I says you don't need to call a city planet the technical term, which is like a Euphemnopolis or whatever it is. Well, in chapter 7, he actually calls it he actually called Coruscant a city planet rather than just a Euphemnopolis or whatever it was. So that was a bit like oh, it's almost like Michael Reeves took on my voice. What, close to 20 years ago? So yeah, I found that funny. But yeah, anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.